He thought his badge made him untouchable. Until the day he pulled over the wrong woman. He laughed when she said, "You'll regret this." But when the truth came out in court, that same laugh died in his throat. Because for the first time in his life, the man who made everyone else kneel was finally forced to face justice himself. "Step out of the car, now." Rain hammered against the windshield as Officer Mark Dalton's voice sliced through the night. The driver's trembling hands gripped the steering wheel. Her eyes darted to the side mirror. Flashing red and blue lights painted her face in terror. Mark leaned closer, tapping his flashlight against the glass, his jaw tight with impatience. He'd done this 1,000 times before. The fear in people's eyes, he lived for it. The window rolled down halfway, and a shaky voice whispered, "Officer, did I do something wrong?" Mark gave a low, mocking laugh. "You tell me. You think you can speed through my town without consequences?" The woman's confusion only made him feel stronger. He towered over her like a wolf that had cornered its prey. The man behind the badge. Officer Mark Dalton had worn the uniform for over a decade. And in the small town of Ridgewood, his name carried weight, like a warning. To outsiders, he was that tough cop who kept the street safe. But locals knew better. Mark was a man who enjoyed authority a little too much. He was the kind of cop who pulled you over for a broken taillight, then found 5 more reasons to fine you. The kind who smirked while you begged for mercy. And when you walked away angry, he'd mutter under his breath, "Next time, keep your mouth shut." At the local bar, his fellow officers laughed at his stories. The idiots he'd written up, the punks he'd put in their place. "The badge makes you untouchable," Mark would say, tapping the metal over his chest. His friends would nod. And maybe they believed it too. But Mark didn't just wear that badge. He hid behind it. A legacy of power. Mark came from a long line of lawmen. His father, Harold Dalton, had been the police chief for 20 years before retiring. In Ridgewood, the Daltons were untouchable royalty. People used to joke that if you crossed a Dalton, you might as well pack your bags and move to another town. Mark grew up on that pride. He wore it like armor. As a teenager, he watched his father walk into restaurants and see everyone fall silent, offering free meals, fake smiles, nervous laughs. He saw what fear could do, and he liked it. "Respect," his father used to say, "isn't given, son. It's taken." But Mark never learned the difference between respect and intimidation. He thought they were the same thing. The badge and the mirror. Every morning, Mark would stand before his mirror, buttoning his uniform with military precision. He'd polish his boots until they gleamed, adjust his nameplate, and stare at the reflection of the man who protected the town. "Officer Mark Dalton," he'd say to himself. "Law and order." But deep down, there was something else, something darker. He didn't see a protector. He saw a king. When he slid his badge into place, it wasn't duty he felt. It was power. That badge wasn't just a piece of metal. It was his crown. And that morning, as thunder rumbled in the distance and rain clouds rolled over Ridgewood, Mark pinned it on his chest once again, unaware that before the week ended, that same badge would be the very thing to bring him down. Just another traffic stop. That night's rainstorm had swallowed the town whole. The streets were slick, streetlights flickered, and the only sound was the hum of tires against wet asphalt. Then, in the corner of his eye, Mark spotted a silver sedan making a careful turn at an intersection. No violation. No real reason to stop her. But Mark was bored. And boredom was dangerous for a man like him. He flicked on his lights. The siren wailed. The driver immediately pulled over. Mark smirked. "Let's see who we've got tonight." He approached slowly, enjoying every second of her fear. A young woman sat behind the wheel, late 20s maybe. Simple clothes, neat hair, a nervous look. He tapped his flashlight twice on the window. "License and registration," he ordered. Her hands shook as she searched her bag. "Was I speeding, officer?" Mark tilted his head. "Do you think I stopped you for fun?" She hesitated. "I didn't mean to." "Step out of the car." The command hit her like a slap. She obeyed, stepping into the cold rain. Mark circled her car, pretending to inspect it, shining his light inside. He knew there was nothing wrong, but the point wasn't justice. It was dominance. He wrote her a ticket for speeding, improper signaling, and resisting verbal instruction, a list so exaggerated it was laughable. When she saw the fine, her eyes filled with tears. "Officer, please. I didn't do anything wrong." Mark grinned. "Then take it to court. But trust me, you won't win." He turned back toward his patrol car, rain dripping from his cap, feeling untouchable. The talk at the bar. Later that night, Mark sat in his usual spot at Murphy's Tavern, the local cop hangout. He tossed the ticket book onto the counter and took a long drink of whiskey. "Another one?" his friend Joe asked. "Some teacher or something," Mark said with a smirk. "Thinks she's smarter than me. I told her she can cry all she wants, but in court, the badge always wins." The men around him chuckled, shaking their heads. "That's Dalton for you," Joe laughed. "The law himself." Mark raised his glass. "To the law." Everyone cheered, glasses clinking. But behind the laughter, one rookie cop sat quietly in the corner, frowning. He'd seen the same look in Mark's eyes before, the hunger, the arrogance. It never ended well. The storm ahead. The next morning, Mark's coffee tasted bitter. He woke with a dull headache, the echo of last night's laughter still in his ears. He didn't know it yet, but that small silver car he stopped, the woman inside, wasn't just another driver. Her name was Clara James. A teacher, yes, but also a recent law graduate, and the apprentice of Judge Eleanor Rhodes, one of the toughest, most respected judges in the state. And while Mark was bragging over drinks, Clara was quietly preparing something that would shake his entire world. For the first time in his career, Officer Mark Dalton would find himself on the other side of the courtroom. And this time, his badge wouldn't save him. Rain still whispered against the window as Clara James sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the bright yellow traffic ticket that Officer Mark Dalton had handed her. $850. Speeding. Failure to signal. Resisting verbal instruction. Her jaw clenched. She'd done nothing wrong. The night replayed in her mind like a cruel movie, his glare, his smirk, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You can cry all you want, lady. Go to court if you think I'm lying." She had cried that night. But now, as dawn broke and the first light crept across her apartment, those tears turned into something else: determination. Mark Dalton had no idea who he had just humiliated. Clara wasn't just a small-town teacher. She had recently earned her law degree, graduating top of her class, and had just started shadowing Judge Eleanor Rhodes, one of the toughest and most respected judges in the entire state. A teacher with a fire inside. By day, Clara taught middle school English. She loved her students. But at night, she studied case files, court procedures, and legal ethics. She wanted to make the system fairer, especially for those who couldn't defend themselves. That's what made Mark Dalton's abuse sting so deeply. It wasn't just about a ticket. It was about power, and how easily people like him misused it. When she arrived at work that morning, her students noticed her silence. "Miss James, are you okay?" one little girl asked. Clara forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart." But inside, she made a quiet promise. "I'm not going to let this go." The mentor's advice. That evening, Clara met Judge Eleanor Rhodes in her chambers, a woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority without ever needing to shout. "Rough day?" the judge asked, glancing up from a stack of files. Clara hesitated before sliding the ticket across the desk. "He lied, ma'am." "The officer. He stopped me for no reason. He searched my car without asking, humiliated me in the rain. I felt powerless." Judge Rhodes read the paper slowly, then looked up, her gaze piercing. "Mark Dalton," she murmured. "That name rings a bell." "He said I couldn't win in court," Clara said quietly. The judge leaned back. "Then that's exactly where you'll prove him wrong." She opened a drawer and pulled out a case folder. "File a defense. Prepare your evidence." And Clara, "Yes, ma'am." Don't go in angry. Go in prepared. Justice doesn't shout, it speaks. Preparing for battle. For the next few nights, Clara barely slept. She gathered every piece of evidence she could find. A nearby gas station security camera had captured the moment she turned the corner, driving under the speed limit. Her GPS tracker showed her exact route and speed. Even her students' parents were willing to testify that she had left school on time and driven carefully, as always. With every document she printed and every file she highlighted, her confidence grew. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person Officer Dalton had ever bullied. Mark's confidence. Meanwhile, Officer Mark Dalton barely remembered her name. To him, she was just another face in a long line of people who trembled under his authority. When the court summons arrived 2 weeks later, he scoffed. "She's really taking this to court?" he laughed, tossing the paper onto his desk. Some people never learn. His partner, Officer Joe, looked uneasy. "Maybe you should check the dashcam before the hearing. Make sure it's..." Mark waved him off. "Relax. The badge speaks for itself." That line, "the badge speaks for itself," was about to echo back at him in a way he never imagined. The day of reckoning. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as people filled the benches. Officer Dalton walked in confidently, uniform crisp, chin high. He'd been here countless times before. The system had always favored him. Then he froze. At the defense table stood Clara James, calm, poised, and confident. And at the bench sat Judge Eleanor Rhodes. Mark's face paled. "Officer Dalton," Judge Rhodes said, glancing at the file. "You're familiar with Miss James, I presume?" Mark cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor." A routine stop. She was speeding. Clara stood. "With all due respect, Your Honor, that's a lie." The judge nodded. "Proceed, Miss James." The truth unfolds. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with conviction. She presented the footage from the gas station camera, clear as day. Her car moving well within the speed limit. According to this timestamp, she said, "I was driving 34 miles per hour in a 40 zone." Murmurs filled the courtroom. She then showed her GPS records, which matched perfectly. Finally, she submitted a written statement detailing the unlawful search of her vehicle. Mark's confident expression began to crack. He shifted in his seat, tugging at his collar. Judge Rhodes leaned forward. "Officer Dalton, would you like to explain this discrepancy?" He stammered. I must have misread the..." Misread. The judge's voice was cold. Or fabricated? The silence was deafening. The turning point. Clara turned toward him, her eyes calm but unflinching. "Officer Dalton, you swore an oath to protect people like me, not to abuse your power. You told me I couldn't win against you. But justice doesn't wear a badge, it wears truth." Her words hung in the air. The spectators fell silent. Even Mark's fellow officers avoided his gaze. Judge Rhodes set down her pen. "This court finds the citation invalid. Furthermore, given the evidence, I am forwarding this matter to Internal Affairs for review." Mark's stomach dropped. He'd never seen this side of the system before, the side where his badge meant nothing. A shift in the air. As Clara gathered her papers, Judge Rhodes gave a small, proud smile. "Very well done, Miss James." Court dismissed. Outside the courthouse, reporters had already gathered. Word was spreading. An officer had been caught lying under oath. Mark pushed through the crowd, avoiding the cameras, his once proud shoulders now heavy with shame. And as he reached his car, he saw Clara standing on the steps, watching him quietly. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply said, "You were right, officer. I couldn't win against your badge, so I won with the truth." Mark looked at her for a long time before lowering his head and walking away. The beginning of his fall. That night, Mark sat alone in his patrol car, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in his life, he didn't see power in that badge. He saw a stain. And for the first time ever, Officer Mark Dalton began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't untouchable after all. The small town of Ridgewood hadn't seen this kind of tension in years. Whispers spread through diners, coffee shops, and grocery stores. "Did you hear about Officer Dalton?" It started as a rumor. Then it became a headline. And soon it was a full-blown investigation. The untouchable cop, Mark Dalton, was being called to testify in court not as a hero, not as an officer, but as a defendant. The investigation begins. Within days of Clara's case, complaints began pouring into internal affairs. Dozens of citizens came forward, people who had been too afraid to speak before. A single mother fined for attitude. A teenage boy ticketed for jaywalking in his own driveway. Even a war veteran humiliated during a traffic stop. Each story painted the same picture. Mark Dalton, the man who thought his badge made him king. At first, Mark tried to laugh it off. People will say anything when they don't get their way, he told his partner Joe. But Joe's silence said everything. Soon, his superiors called him in. "Mark," said the new police chief, "you're being placed on temporary suspension pending review." Mark's mouth went dry. Suspension? For what? For doing my job. The chief sighed. For crossing lines you should have never crossed. A familiar courtroom, a different seat. 2 weeks later, Mark sat in a courtroom again, but this time not behind the badge. He wasn't the man enforcing the law now. He was the one being judged by it. The irony stung. He'd stood in this room countless times before, chest puffed out, his uniform spotless. He'd watched people squirm under his stare, certain they'd never win against him. Now he sat in the same spot they once did, hands clasped, sweat collecting on his neck, his confidence slipping with every tick of the clock. And to make it worse, Judge Eleanor Rhodes would be presiding. The same judge who had seen through his lies in Clara's case. The same woman Clara had once called mentor. When she entered the room, everyone stood. Mark swallowed hard. "Officer Mark Dalton," she began, her tone crisp. "This hearing concerns allegations of misconduct, abuse of authority, and falsification of reports. Do you understand the charges against you?" Mark nodded, his voice low. "Yes, Your Honor." Clara returns. When the doors at the back of the courtroom opened, all eyes turned. There she was, Clara James. She hadn't come out of revenge or spite. She came because she believed in accountability. And deep down, she hoped maybe, just maybe, Mark would finally face the truth. Her calm presence made the room quieter. Even Mark looked away when their eyes met. She took a seat behind the prosecution table, there to assist in presenting the case. And this time, the power dynamic had completely shifted. No flashing lights. No rain. No badge. Just truth and justice, staring him straight in the face. The evidence speaks. The prosecution started strong. First came dashcam footage, several clips where Mark had exaggerated or completely fabricated violations. In one, a driver asked politely why she was being stopped. Mark's voice could be heard saying, "Keep talking and I'll find 5 more reasons to fine you." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Then came bodycam footage, his own voice, laughing with colleagues after issuing impossible fines. Mark's attorney objected repeatedly, but Judge Rhodes allowed each piece. Finally, Clara rose. "Your Honor, I have one more exhibit to present," she said, her voice steady. From her bag, she pulled out a small black notebook, Mark's old citation log. Each page detailed hundreds of stops, most for vague or minor reasons, many matching the complaints filed. "Your Honor," Clara continued, "this notebook is a record not of duty, but of domination. Each line represents someone who walked away humiliated because Officer Dalton believed his badge made him untouchable." Mark's eyes widened. He hadn't realized that old logbook was still on file. "Objection," his lawyer barked. "Overruled," said the judge. The silence that followed was heavy. The man cracks. Mark tried to defend himself. "I was doing my job. You have no idea how hard it is out there. People lie, they resist, they—" Judge Rhodes slammed her gavel. "Enough." Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. "This isn't about how hard your job is, Officer Dalton. It's about how easy it became for you to abuse it." Mark's shoulders slumped. His mouth opened, but no words came. In that moment, something inside him broke. The pride, the arrogance, it all drained away. He finally saw himself not as a hero, not as a protector, but as the villain in his own story. The judge's words. Judge Rhodes leaned forward, her eyes sharp but not cruel. "When a person wears a badge," she began, "they carry the weight of trust. The people of this town gave you authority, Officer Dalton, but you used it as a weapon. You tarnished the meaning of justice." She paused, letting the silence settle. "This court hereby finds you guilty of misconduct and falsification of records. You are officially dismissed from duty and will face review by the State Ethics Board." The gavel struck once. Bang. It was over. A quiet moment. After the courtroom emptied, Mark sat alone in the same chair, staring at his reflection in the polished table. For the first time in years, he wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He was empty. When he finally stood, he saw Clara waiting near the doorway. She walked up slowly, holding out her hand. "Sometimes," she said softly, "losing everything is how we learn what really matters." Mark looked at her, this woman he once mocked, and saw not revenge, but grace. He shook her hand quietly. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked. "For making me see what my badge never could." The town's reaction. In the days that followed, Ridgewood changed. People began speaking more freely, reporting misconduct without fear. The new police chief promised reforms, transparency, and accountability. And as for Mark, he disappeared from the headlines. No more flashing lights. No more authority. Just a man learning to live without the power he once abused. He'd walk through town now and then, no uniform, no badge. And sometimes he'd pass Clara at the community center, where she now offered free legal advice to those who needed help the most. She'd smile politely. He'd nod back. No words were needed anymore. Because both of them understood. Power doesn't make you untouchable. Character does. For 12 years, Officer Mark Dalton had walked the streets of Ridgewood with his head held high and his badge gleaming on his chest. Now, that same badge lay inside a small evidence bag, sealed and tagged with his name. He sat alone in the locker room, staring at the empty space where his uniform used to hang. Every sound echoed, the drip of a leaky pipe, the creak of a metal bench, the hum of fluorescent lights. The station he once ruled now felt like a stranger's place. When he finally stood up, he noticed something that cut deeper than any punishment. His colleagues avoided his eyes. No one spoke. No one said goodbye. He had once been their brother in blue. Now, he was the example they whispered about. The headlines. By the next morning, the news had spread everywhere. Officer found guilty of misconduct in Ridgewood. Abuse of power scandal rocks small town police department. Mark's face was on every local channel. His name flooded social media, followed by angry comments and disgusted reactions. He turned off his phone, but it didn't matter. Even stepping outside felt impossible. The grocery store cashier wouldn't look at him. The diner waitress, once friendly, simply said, "We're closed," even though he could see customers eating inside. Everywhere he went, he saw the same look, disappointment and betrayal. He'd worn the badge like armor. Now, it was the reason no one wanted to be near him. The family fallout. At home, things weren't better. His wife, Laura, sat on the couch, eyes red from crying. Their teenage son stood by the stairs, silent, clutching his backpack. Mark tried to speak. "It's not as bad as they're saying." His wife cut him off. "Mark, they have video. They have recordings. How could you, after everything your father taught you?" He froze. His father, Chief Harold Dalton, the man who had built his life around honor, order, and legacy. Mark whispered, "Dad wouldn't have wanted." "Your father would have been ashamed," she said, voice trembling. "You didn't protect this town. You terrorized it." He had no words, just silence. His son finally spoke, his voice small but sharp. "Mom says you might go to jail. Is that true?" Mark's throat tightened. No, I don't think so." But in that moment, it didn't matter whether he went to jail or not. He'd already lost everything that made his life mean something. The visit to his father's grave. 2 days later, Mark drove to the old Ridgewood Cemetery. The rain had turned the dirt to mud, and his boots sank as he walked toward his father's headstone. He stood there for a long while, staring at the engraved words. Chief Harold Dalton, a man of honor and justice. Mark swallowed hard. "Honor and justice," he muttered bitterly. "Guess I failed both, huh?" The wind blew cold, carrying the faint smell of pine and rain. He knelt, resting a trembling hand on the grave. "You told me to take respect, Dad," he said quietly. "You said it wasn't given. But you never told me what happens when the respect you take runs out." For the first time in years, Mark Dalton cried, not out of anger or frustration, but out of pure shame. The breaking point. That night, Mark returned to his empty house. Laura and their son had gone to stay with her sister. The silence felt heavier than any courtroom sentence. He sat in his recliner, staring at his badge, still inside that clear evidence bag. It looked small now, powerless. He turned on the TV. A local news anchor was interviewing Clara James. She sat calmly, speaking about accountability, reform, and hope. "This isn't about one man," she said. "It's about reminding everyone that the law belongs to the people, not to those who enforce it." Her words hit him harder than the judge's verdict. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cruel. She was simply right. Mark leaned forward, whispering to himself, "I became the thing I swore to protect people from." And for the first time, he truly meant it. The town without fear. In the weeks that followed, Ridgewood changed. People walked with a new sense of confidence. Officers spoke more politely. The police chief announced body cam reforms and open complaint policies. For the first time in years, citizens felt safe talking to the police instead of hiding from them. And though Mark wasn't there to see it, the town finally began to heal from the fear he had once created. A chance at redemption. One afternoon, a letter arrived in Mark's mailbox. It was from Clara James. Inside just one line: "If you truly want to make things right, help us teach others what went wrong." Attached was a flyer for a community outreach program, a mentorship event for young officers and law students about ethics, empathy, and accountability. He stared at it for a long time. Then slowly he nodded. The first step. The next week, Mark walked into the Ridgewood Community Hall. Dozens of people were there, citizens, students, new recruits. When he stepped to the microphone, a wave of murmurs rippled through the room. He cleared his throat, holding the paper in his trembling hands. "My name is Mark Dalton," he began quietly, "and I used to think my badge made me untouchable." The room went still. "I thought power meant control. I thought authority meant fear. But I was wrong. Power without conscience is poison. Authority without respect is nothing." He looked up, meeting their eyes one by one. "I lost everything because I stopped seeing people as people. Don't make the same mistake I did." When he stepped down, the audience didn't clap right away. But Clara, standing near the back, gave him a small, approving nod. That was enough. The quiet redemption. After that day, Mark began volunteering regularly, helping teach conflict resolution and empathy to young recruits. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't expect praise. He just wanted to give something back. At night, he still dreamed of flashing lights and rain. But in those dreams now, he wasn't the man shouting, "Step out of the car." He was the one holding out his hand, helping someone stand. The fall that saved him. Sometimes when he walked past the old station, he'd stop and look through the glass doors. Inside, he could see the new recruits laughing, training, trying their best. He'd smile faintly. He wasn't Officer Dalton anymore. Just Mark, a man who had fallen hard and finally learned what honor truly meant. Because in losing everything, he found something far greater: humanity. The years passed quietly for Mark Dalton. He no longer wore a uniform, no badge, no gun. But for the first time in his life, he finally wore peace. Every morning, he'd walk through Ridgewood's small park, coffee in hand, the sunrise glinting through the trees. He'd nod at the joggers, wave to the vendors, and smile at the very people who once crossed the street to avoid him. No one called him Officer Dalton anymore. And he didn't mind. Because now respect wasn't something he demanded. It was something he quietly earned back, piece by piece. The classroom. One afternoon, Mark stood in front of a small classroom at Ridgewood Community College. A banner above the board read, "Ethics in Law Enforcement, Guest Speaker, Mark Dalton." He looked at the eager young faces before him, students taking notes, wide-eyed, full of hope. He took a deep breath. "I used to think being a cop meant being the strongest man in the room," he began. "But strength isn't about fear. It's about restraint, about compassion, about knowing when not to use your power. He paused, glancing at a student in the front row, a young woman with bright eyes and a quiet confidence. "Sir," she asked, "what made you change? I mean, what really made you realize what you'd become?" Mark smiled faintly. "Losing everything," he said, "and meeting one woman who refused to be afraid of me." The visit. That evening, after class, Mark made his way to the courthouse, the same one where his downfall had begun. The marble steps glowed orange in the sunset as he climbed them slowly. Inside, the echo of heels on polished floors greeted him. And then her voice. "Officer Dalton." He turned. There she was, Clara James. Still calm, still composed, but softer this time, her sharp edges smoothed by time. "Clara," he said, almost in disbelief. "Didn't think I'd ever see you here again." She smiled slightly. "I heard you've been speaking to recruits. Making a difference." He chuckled. "Trying to. Maybe it's too late." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it's never too late to start doing the right thing." They walked together through the empty courtroom. "This place used to terrify me," Clara admitted. "But now it feels like where things changed. Not just for me, for you too." Mark nodded slowly. "This courtroom broke me," he said quietly. "But I think that's what I needed." The town hall. Months later, a large community event was held in Ridgewood, a night for justice and change. Mark had been invited as one of the keynote speakers. When he stepped on stage, the crowd murmured. Some recognized him. Some didn't. He adjusted the microphone, his voice calm and steady. "I once believed my badge made me untouchable," he began. "I thought being feared was the same as being respected. I thought silence meant authority. But silence is often just fear." He paused, looking around the room. "I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I used my badge to protect myself, not others. And it took losing that badge to finally understand what it was supposed to stand for." He looked down for a moment, collecting himself. "When you wear the uniform, it's not a crown, it's a promise. A promise that you'll stand between right and wrong, no matter what it costs you." The crowd was silent. Every word hung heavy, but honest. "I failed that promise once," he said softly. "I won't fail it again." When he stepped back, the audience didn't explode into applause. Instead, they rose to their feet slowly, a standing silence. A sign of respect, the real kind. Clara, watching from the side of the stage, smiled through tears. A quiet redemption. Later that night, Mark walked alone through the dark streets of Ridgewood. The neon lights reflected on the wet pavement, just like the night his story began. He stopped near the old intersection where he'd once pulled Clara over years ago. For a long time, he just stood there, listening to the hum of the traffic lights, the distant chatter, the soft rhythm of life continuing on. Then he closed his eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry." No one heard it, but somehow it felt like the whole town had. The new generation. A few years later, Ridgewood Police Academy held a ceremony for new graduates. Mark, now in his 50s, sat quietly in the back row, watching the young recruits receive their badges. Each one stepped forward proudly, shaking hands with the chief. When the ceremony ended, a young officer approached him. "Mr. Dalton?" she asked shyly. "I just wanted to say, I heard your speech last year. That's why I joined. Because I want to be the kind of officer you became, not the one you were." Mark's eyes softened. He smiled, truly humbled. "Then you're already a better cop than I ever was." She grinned, saluted him, and walked off. For the first time in years, Mark felt something deep inside him, something that had once been lost. Pride, not in power, but in change. The final lesson. That night, as the sun set behind Ridgewood's hills, Mark sat on a park bench, watching children play. A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying laughter and warmth. He thought about his father, about his son, about Clara. And then he whispered to himself, "I used to think my badge made me untouchable, but maybe what really makes us untouchable is knowing when to admit we were wrong." He smiled at the thought, closing his eyes as the world around him glowed gold with the fading light. And though he was just one man in one small town, his story had become something far bigger, a reminder that even those who fall the hardest can still stand again. Because redemption isn't given. It's earned. In the end, it wasn't the badge that made him powerful. It was the courage to admit he was wrong. He once used fear to control others, but found peace by serving truth instead. Because real strength isn't in the uniform you wear, it's in the heart that dares to change. And sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in the streets, they're fought inside ourselves.